Today, I'm going to show you how to do that with virtually no tooling. That's coming up. Hello everyone, my name's Daniel Reese. This is Weaver Leather Supply. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how to do a project like this without your basic leather tooling tools, stuff like mauls and stamps and that kind of thing. This, for the most part, was done with a pyrography kit. Now, pyrography is just a big fancy word for wood burning on leather, but you'd be amazed what you can do with some very basic techniques. So let's go ahead and jump in, not waste any more time. First things first is we're going to be using a very lightweight leather. This is a 2 ounce, maybe 3. I really believe it's a 2 ounce leather. This is Herman Oak Veg Tan from Weaver. And anytime we're doing any kind of pyrography, it's always going to be on veg tan leather. We never want to use chrome tan, oil tan, none of that, because it's going to release toxic fumes as we apply heat to it. So we want to avoid any of that. We're always going to be using veg tan. Now, the reason we can get away with using such a lightweight leather for this is because with traditional tooling of leather, you're capitalizing on the thickness of that leather. We're pushing some of it down, we're lifting some of it, and that's what we use to really create that dimension and the illusion of depth. With pyrography, we're not really doing that. We can, but for this particular project, we're not going to. So we're going to be able to get away with using a very lightweight leather for this project. So the first thing we need to do is just prep the project. And the way we're going to be doing that, first of all, we need to cut the leather to the correct size. I did mine at an 8.5 by 11 so that it fit nicely into a frame, but you can do yours whatever size you'd like to do it at. Then we need to transfer the image to the leather. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this. The most common way to do it is just with tracing film. And if you need more information on that, we did a video not long ago. I'll make sure we put a link in the description. Once we've got the leather prep, then we need to get our pyrography kit up and running. And I'm going to be using this one from Weaver Leather Supply. It's got a dial on it. I really like this. This makes it a lot easier to control the depth of the burn that you're applying to the leather. Most of the time, I'm going to be running it between like 2 and maybe 4. Usually it's around 2 to 3. But it also comes with interchangeable tips. Some of them are perfect for writing. Some of them are perfect for line work. The ones that I'm going to be using today have a really fine edge on them, and you can use those for anything between hairlines all the way up to calligraphy. So just like when we're tooling leather, it's really important that we make sure we have the right moisture content in the leather. And ironically, it's pretty much the same as when you're tooling leather. You just want it to be damp, feel cool to the touch. The drier it gets, the more the leather tends to scorch instead of just taking the color. So one thing I'd point out is that I'm not doing a lot of straight lines. I'm doing a lot of short lines. And that's because in a lot of the places on the lion, especially like on his chest and his legs, the hair has a broken edge to it. Now, when I get to the back of the lion, you're going to see a lot more of the long straight lines. And that's because the hair in that area lays flat. I would also want to point out how thin these lines are. The wider the line, the harder it's going to be to blend. Once I've got everything lined out, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna start putting in some shadows. And the easiest way that I found to do this is number one, start with a low temperature setting like a 1 or a 2 on your pyrography kit. And two, start with the biggest, most obvious shadows and work down into the more subtle ones. As we lay in the shadows, we want to work them in slow. So I'm barely creating a shadow here. That's going to give me the ability to correct and adjust if I need to. To create the shadows, I'm just using the flat part of the tip on a really low setting with a really light touch. So one question you might have is, how do I know where to put the shadows? How big should they be? That kind of thing, right? Because we want to get these proportions right. Well, you'll notice in some of the clips that you can see my reference picture sitting next to the project, and it's usually in the same orientation. So if the lion's looking that way in my project, the lion's looking that way in the reference picture. And that helps as you turn it to make sure that you have a good point of reference and the right perspective on how the shadows should fall. So now that we've got our line work and our shadows really starting to develop and we have an idea of the shape of the lion and the direction that the hair is going to flow, now we can start going in and really developing the fur and the grain on the log. And to do that, I'm going to be using a hair blade. Now a hair blade, it looks a lot like a pencil. You've got a bit on each end and it has lines on it that as you drag it across the leather, it creates the illusion of hair. As we start to lay in the lines for the hair and the log, we want it to be as subtle as we can. We want a really light touch with that hair blade. What that's going to do for us is if we make a mistake and the hair's going the wrong direction on maybe the flank of the lion, well, because we were so light and subtle, we can go back and it's pretty easy to correct that. Whereas if we go in with a really heavy touch, it can be a lot more difficult to correct. One of the nice things about this leather being so lightweight is that it's really easy to manipulate and stretch. And that's going to allow us to give the lion and the log, for that matter, a lot more dimension and shape to them. To do that, all we really have to do is just get something that has a rounded point. We don't want it to be sharp, but something that has a rounded point on the end of it, and we can push out from the back side of the leather and stretch it out. One of the easiest things to use to do this with would be a pear shader. Most of us, if we've tooled leather in the past, have a pear shader laying around. It's got a rounded, blunt end to it, and it works really well for that kind of thing. The important part is to make sure that we pay attention to the anatomy of the lion. Obviously, his back leg would probably stick out a little bit further than his front shoulder would. Not by a lot, but a little bit. If we stretch his stomach out too much, he's going to look like a pudgy lion. So we don't want to do that either. So as you start to stretch this out a little bit, pay attention to which one should be more in the foreground, which one should be more prominent. So once we got it all stretched out, we've got some shape to the lion. We need to put something behind it to help it hold its shape. Otherwise, it's just going to be a squishy, floppy piece of leather. One of the best things that you can get for this is Renai cork filler. I think it's pronounced Renai. I could be wrong about that. But this stuff right here is really good. It's one of my favorites for backfilling leather, and the process is super simple. You're going to have your main piece of leather. We're going to have a backer piece, and we're going to have the cork filling. So on the back of your main piece of leather, we're going to put a coat of contact cement on there, set it aside, let it dry. We're going to do the same thing to the backer piece. Once those two have dried and they're more or less tacky, then we're going to take that cork filler and go in and fill in those cavities. Essentially what we want to do is we want it more or less smooth. It doesn't have to be packed in completely. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. It will manipulate later in the process. But for now, what we want to do is we want to take that cork filler, put it in those cavities that we created by stretching the leather. Then we're going to put glue on that as well as the backer piece. So we've got first layer of contact cement on both pieces, filler with the cork filler. Then we're going to cover both pieces with contact cement again. Once they've set up and they're tacky, then we can put them together and really press everything together to make sure that we've got good contact. Now, the reason I didn't do this in studio and on camera is because it requires a fair amount of contact cement. And this is one of the spare bedrooms in my house, and filling the house with fumes from contact cement is not really the best idea. So I wasn't able to do it on camera, but the process is really simple. Glue both pieces, let it dry, add your cork filler, put glue on both pieces again, let it get tacky, and put them together, press them together so they got good contact. It's that simple. Now we can use some of our more traditional leather tools. First thing we're going to be using is our wing dividers, and we're going to use that to mark out our tooling window. Mine are set at about 1/4 of an inch. Then I'm going to lightly cut it in with a swivel knife. We don't want to go too deep because remember, we're using 2 to 3 ounce leather. Then I'm going to go back with my bevel and bevel those lines in so that I create that tooling window. If you need more information on any of those steps, don't worry, we've done videos on all of them. I'll make sure we put a link in the description so you can find them easy. One thing you might notice now is how much easier it is to see where the shadows and the highlights would naturally go. Really, all you have to do is lay your project down, set up a light source so that it hits from one angle. That'll show you naturally where your highlights would hit and where your shadows would fall. And then we go back with the Pyrography Kit and just enhance those shadows. So it was about this point in the project where I screwed up. Sometimes when you have a project that you've been working on and it was cased and damp when you quit working on it, when you set it aside and leave it out all overnight, sometimes it will curl. Now you can put them in plastic bags and a variety of other things to prevent that, but sometimes, especially if they've been backed and 3D embossed, they'll curl on you a little bit. Well, what I like to do is sit it face down, and I'll put one of these weights on there on the back to help compress it and either get the curl out of it or prevent it from curling in the first place. The problem was this time I didn't sit this on the back, I set it on the front, and apparently it had some black stuff on there that transferred to the front of my project. And at this point I'm thinking, well, I don't want to start over. I'm way too far into this project to start over. And two, I've always told them that I'll share my mistakes with you and show you how to fix it. So I decided to leave it in the project. I figured it'd be a great learning opportunity. These things happen in real life on real projects. In fact, the other day I was working on a project for a magazine and I had it on the workbench back here behind me, and my son's cat drooled on the project. Hand to God, I'm not lying. I've never seen this cat drool before, but it drooled in one of the upper corners of the project, and it left a watermark on it. And I had to figure out how to get around this because I wasn't about to start over this major project. These things happen in real life, and you got to figure out how to work with them sometimes. So I decided to leave it in the project, and I'm going to show you a little later how I decided to deal with it. But that's for later in the process. For now, we need to go back, and we're going to use our Pyrography Kit to add small amounts of fur, very subtle, to the lion, and we're going to add some wood grain into the log. As we're going through and we're adding in this texture into the fur and into the wood grain, we really want a light touch on a low temperature so that the marks are as light and subtle as we can make them. So one of the very last things that we're going to need to do before we move on to adding color to the project is add in the suggestion of foliage down around those branches and at the bottom of the log. And to do that, I'm going to be using this stamp right here. In fact, we'll put a picture of it here and we'll put the number right over here. And there's a link in the description too so that you can get one if you'd like. But the key to making this particular stamp work is that as you work across the leather, you want to be rolling it back and forth in your fingers. If you don't do that, what ends up happening is you create repeating patterns, and we don't want that. That's not something you see in nature very often. So what we want to do is we want to roll that stamp back and forth as we work our way across the leather. So with that, we're ready to start adding color to the project. But I don't really want to rush through that. I want to take an entire video and walk through the how and why of all of it. We're going to take a look at the techniques and the strategies, when to do them, how to do them, when not to do them. We're going to use multiple different techniques and blend them together. We're going to go through all of that, and we're really going to do a deep dive into it. So that's going to be coming up in one of the upcoming videos over the next week or so. That'll do it for this video. I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, go make something amazing.